this phrase, once saved, always saved, has gotten itself into a lot of trouble over time. That's why I added to this bullet point, no matter what. Because typically people who bring up and hold to that have to always use a lot of qualifications with this phrase, once saved, always saved, because of all the baggage that has been introduced with this term. So what do I mean by that? So historically, I mean, just giving you a history lesson here, people who use the term once saved, always saved, it was unlikely for them to ever entertain the term perseverance being attached to that. So you're already dealing with a negative right there, a negative connotation, right? That historically people who use the phrase once saved, always saved never had the idea of perseverance attached to it. So that's why I don't want to use it, because then if I use it, then I have to kind of redefine it to mean something that didn't historically mean. All right. So that's a big part of the issue that I have. Okay. And so the idea here is that once a person was saved, I'm putting my double quotes here. Once a person was saved in this idea for eternity, he is saved no matter what he or she did. I'm giving you the historic view here. No matter what he or she did. Of course, many who believed this doctrine of once saved, always saved, I'm giving you the historic view now, also equated walking the aisle or making a profession of faith with being saved. You see, I'm saved because I walked the aisle. I'm saved because the preacher shook my hand. I'm saved because I got baptized. I'm saved. It's the idea. I'm going to tell you where a lot of this came from. Now, I brought this up before. In fact, when I believe I was on April Chapman, I was on her live recently when we talked about the differences between legalism and antinomianism, using both Gino Jennings on the legalistic side, Jamal Bryant on the antinomian side, talked about this idea of Finneyism. See, I think after the Second Great Awakening, you had this idea of getting people, gimmicks, getting people to do certain things, and based on them doing things, that meant they were saved. Like, have you ever heard people say this statement like, oh man, we had a soul winning campaign and 100 people got saved today. Well, how do you know 100 people got saved? Yeah, 100 people might have made a profession of faith, but it doesn't necessarily mean 100 people were saved. So this idea of walking an aisle, shaking the preacher's hand, filling out a card, saying the sinner's prayer, all of these ideas, right, that have kind of been so pervasive in modern evangelicalism, right, gets its roots back in Finneyism and things like that, that we need to avoid that, because I did a live, well, I didn't do a live, I did a whole series on the authentic gospel. And if you recall, if you've been a long time follower of this channel, I did a series on the authentic gospel, and I talked about rubble removal, about how we got to remove in modern evangelicalism so much rubble because people have a wrong view of the gospel, have a wrong view of salvation, and you put those two things together, and you know what you get? You get churches filled with false converts. I mean, I would submit to you that most of the people within the context of modern evangelicalism, specifically in the American context, are false converts. I know that sounds like strong language, but I'm really convinced of that based on how the gospel's being presented, the lack of emphasis on repentance. I mean, walking an aisle, filling out a card, all these gimmicks that so-called pastors are doing to drive people to do things emotionally, playing 100 stanzas of Just As I Am to get people to make an emotional appeal, an emotional response, to make a decision for Christ. All of these things lead to false converts. False converts, right? So that's why, we need to understand as we're talking about these things. And I highly recommend that you go check out the video series I did about the authentic gospel, wherein I lay out, the gospel according to apostolic proclamation. Like, what did the apostles preach? The gospel they preached is the gospel we should be preaching today. We don't need to change it. We don't need to alter it. We can't presume to be so clever that we're so smart that we can add to what the Bible has already given us. The Bible's enough on this issue, okay? So, a little bit of background there. So that's why I'm very passionate. And I know there's some individuals. Look, the caveat here is, I know there's some individuals with big platforms that have channels and they talk a lot about once saved, always saved. But what you notice, they'll qualify it. They won't use this historic definition because this historic definition, I'm gonna just full disclosure, is trash, right? This historic definition doesn't meet the biblical test, okay? So that's why you will have those on their platforms that may use the phrase once saved, always saved, but you'll notice they'll qualify it. It will not be the historic definition if they're actually dealing with it biblically.